Gordy Black, thank you for being the surprise guest. Obviously, there was a big crowd that showed up tonight wondering who it might be. I wonder what you would think as if we actually announced you ahead of time what kind of crowd we'd have.
Probably zero.
You native from Jamestown?
Born and raised.
Whereabouts?
Lived most of my life with my parents on Camp Street in Allen Park, which was a great place to grow up and learn how to play baseball.
What'd your dad do for a living?
He worked at Crescent Tool. He was a foreman there for 40-some years.
You play baseball on the Crescent Tool team, right?
No. My mother came from Norway in 1914, and my dad came from Sweden in 1950. And they met in Jamestown a few years later.
At a Lutheran church?
Lutheran church.
So you're one of the real Lutherans at this campus.
Ah, yes.
I don't know that there are a lot of them, are there?
We're in the minority.
How do you feel about that, being at a Lutheran campus and being in the minority? Does that bother you?
Feels comforting.
And part of your world is you played baseball at Allen Park. Do you remember the early professional baseball in this area? Did your dad take you to those things?
Yeah, I guess when I was a kid, we lived at Allen Park. We took our bikes up in the morning, took a brown bag full of sandwiches and a bat and a glove and went up to Allen Park. And we played baseball for 70 hours a day. And it was just, we had great ball players up in Allen Park. Harry Olson, who is a resident here, he was on our team. And Bob Lind, who's also on the campus, he played first base for our team. So we had a lot of good friends up there, and it was just a way of life.
Did you have a position? I mean, were you like shortstop, pitcher? Were you?
Well, I played third base.
Third base?
And some shortstop, but third base primarily. Got to high school and played for 2 years. Baseball hadn't been a part of the athletic program until our junior year, and then they formed a baseball team. Howie Wyquist, who was the football coach and athletic director, was our baseball coach. He really knew nothing about baseball. But anyway, we put together a pretty good team, and we ended up winning our section. Several of the guys went on to play in college. Bruce Martinson played at Alfred, and Warren Halliday at Baldwin Wallace. Tom Serrell went to the University of Rochester, and Dick Eaton went to Michigan State along with Bob Carlson. Bob Carlson was our ace pitcher, and they went to Michigan State, and I ended up at Allegheny and played 4 years at Allegheny.
Talk a little bit about your manager at Allegheny College. A great college, by the way, if anybody's interested.
Our coach was Bob Garbark. Bob was a former Major League catcher. He had graduated from Allegheny back in the early 30s. Was I think he was a letterman in baseball, basketball, and football. And then he got selected by the Cleveland Indians to play professional baseball. He played for the Cleveland Indians, and then he went on with the Chicago Cubs, and he was on the Chicago Cub team with Dizzy Dean. And they won the World Series back in 1935 or 36. And Garby told me later on that the money that he got from playing in the World Series, he got $5,000, which today is pocket change for these players. And he said that was enough for he and his wife to buy a house.
Wow.
But anyway, Garby then went on to play for the Red Sox.
And by the way, as with the Cubs, he was the second string catcher behind a guy named
Gabby Hartnett.
Yeah, not bad.
So anyway, and then he went on to play with the Red Sox during WW2, and he ended up his career. He had a brother, Mike, who played for the New York Yankees. They were both catchers. But anyway, he came to Allegheny, and he was our coach, and we had great times. We heard a lot of stories.
Give me your best Bob Garbart story. Well, this is very personal. I've heard some of these that are great, so Gordy, give me your best stuff.
We went up to play Baldwin Wallace. In those days, we didn't have buses that carted us around. We went by cars. Some of the players had cars on campus. So we packed 5 or 6 guys in a car, and we went up to Cleveland to play Baldwin Wallace. And after the game, Garvey said, hey guys, how about let's go down to the Cleveland Stadium tonight. I think the Philadelphia Athletics are playing there. He said, that was where I finished out my career, with the Philadelphia Athletics. So he said, follow me down to the stadium. I'm going to see if we can get some free tickets. So we followed Garvey down to the stadium, got there early, and Garvey left. In a few minutes he came back and he motioned us to come in. He said, well, we're all set, we got free tickets. So we went in and sat down in the lower deck, and that was when Cleveland was a powerhouse. They had all these great players. They had Larry Doby and Luke Easter, and they were one of the powerhouses in the league. And Philadelphia was on the way out. But anyway, we're sitting there watching the first inning, and Cleveland just hammered the daylights out of this Philadelphia pitcher. And suddenly there was a guy warming up out in the Philadelphia bullpen, and Garvey said to someone, who is that out in the bullpen? Who's got a scorecard to check on that number? He said, I think I know who it is. Well, it turned out, he said, one of the teammates said, Bob, it's Lou Brissy. And Garvey said, Lou Brissy? He said, wow. He said, when he was a rookie, I was roommate with him, and Connie Mack told me, I want you to teach him everything you know, Garvey. Well, about 1 inning later, they brought Brissy in, and he was a bonus boy at the time, and they just shelled Lou Brissy. They were hitting home runs, line drives all over, and we always kidded Garvey and said, yep, Garvey, you taught him everything you knew. So that was we had a good time with Garvey.
Your connection in so many fronts, Gordy, reads like Forrest Gump. I mean, you're everywhere at all times. And I'm going to just throw out some experiences that I know you had, but share with them. For example, the first professional team in the history of Jamestown baseball associated with the Pittsburgh Pirates was at Celeron Park.
Right.
And you were there during an unbelievable exhibition game they had between the Pittsburgh Pirates, National League Pittsburgh Pirates, and the Class D team from Celeron. So here's a baseball. Why don't you talk about the experience, because I don't know anybody still alive who can talk about this.
They really got to be old.
Well, I didn't want to say
Anyway, my dad and I went up to see the game, and I got there early enough, and I got a brand new baseball, which I have here, but I got some autographs. At the time, I just went out in the infield and got autographs. And they didn't mean a lot to me at the time. But on this ball, I've got the autograph of Honus Wagner. I've got the 2 Wayner boys, Little Poison and Big Poison Wayner. And they're in the Hall of Fame. One of them's in the Hall of Fame with Honus Wagner. Archie Vaughn, who was a shortstop, and he also was in the Hall of Fame. But that's the baseball that I had at the time that the Pirates came to town. Unfortunately, I guess the baseball went from hand to hand to hand to hand, and it's not in the greatest shape, but you can see Honus Wagner's autograph pretty distinctly, and Archie Vaughn and L.B. Fletcher, and that was it.
He's expecting it back when the night is done. It's amazing. Shortly thereafter, and this is amazing because that was 1939, and recently, this past summer, July 4th, 2014, article in the Post-Journal, and that article in the Post-Journal featured one Gordon Black of Jamestown holding this ticket, and 75 years ago. So why don't you talk about that before I take it with me?
My dad had a vacation period at Crescent Tool. Every 4th of July was the week that they got off, and my mother and dad had friends living in Brooklyn, Scandinavian friends that they had met and gone to school with and so on. So my dad decided that we should go to visit these friends of theirs in Brooklyn. And we got to Brooklyn, and my dad said, I think there's a doubleheader. He knew I was a baseball fan. I think there's a doubleheader at Yankee Stadium. Let's go see if I can get some tickets. So we somehow got over to Yankee Stadium, got seats, and lo and behold, it was Lou Gehrig's day when Lou Gehrig made his famous speech, I'm the luckiest man in the world. And luckily I kept the ticket stub. Whether it's worth anything or not, it's a little beat up, but it's still...
I don't think it is.
Oh, it isn't.
In case you're curious.
But anyway, I had a great memories of that. Joe DiMaggio, of course, was one of the great players of the Yankees. And his wife was introduced. He was married to Dorothy Arnold. She was a Hollywood movie star at the time. And they sat down maybe 6 or 8 rows in front of us. But I got fond memories of that game. I can remember the Yankee lineup, and I'm not going to go through that. My wife will...
Why don't you? Because there's some Yankee fans here.
Really?
Yeah. Give it a
Well,
shot.
the Yankees had Bill Dickey at catcher, and Babe Dahlgren played first base. He was the one that replaced Lou Gehrig after Lou Gehrig announced his retirement. And Frankie Crosetti played second base. Frank Crosetti on second. Red Rolfe was at third base. Charlie Keller was in left field. DiMaggio was in center field, and George Selkirk was the pitcher. He was a right fielder. And Red Ruffing pitched that first game. He was a legend. Tony Lazzeri played shortstop.
Wow.
And they played the Washington Senators. And the Yankees lost the first game and won the second game.
And this was amazing because the ticket that he's got there has been verified, and so it's all wonderfully, very valuable, by the way. And the ceremony was between the games, right?
Yes, between the first and second games. Mm-hmm.
Did you have a sense? I mean, you're pretty young at this point.
9 years old.
Yeah, and that this was of significance, or was it just sort of a distraction between games?
No, I suddenly realized that I had read that Lou Gehrig had this disease, and that was the reason he retired. So being there, I guess, was meaningful. And I can remember all the players surrounding the mound at Lou Gehrig making a speech. Babe Ruth was out there putting his arm around Lou Gehrig.
It's amazing. You played baseball. You played a lot when you came back from college. In fact, I'm holding an article here that says Rickerson holds Kansas City team in line through 7 innings in good game here. Southpaw Ed Rickerson, Warren's 15-year-old standout, turned in a sterling performance for the Warren Bombers in the first 7 innings of a Saturday evening game before a storm of 8 hits in the 8th frame sent the Kansas City Monarchs under a 10-6 victory. Talk about that. How did you get involved with the Warren Bombers, first of all, and what was this game about?
Well, the Bombers were actually the Jamestown Superstition Bombers. They had a team here that was renowned for years and years. And when they played in Warren, they just picked up the name Warren Bombers. And they contacted the Kansas City Monarchs. In those days, there was a black Major League Baseball league. And the Kansas City Monarchs were part of it, Indianapolis Clowns, and there was several teams where the players were all black, and that was before the blacks really started playing baseball in the majors. But we got an article in advance of the game that we were going to play against Kansas City, and they sent us a note saying there's a player on our team, the Kansas City Monarchs, who's a phenom, and he is about to sign a contract with a major league team. This was in 1955, just before I was going to go in the Army. But anyway, lo and behold, it was Ernie Banks, who ended up being, he's a Hall of Famer, Chicago Cubs. And I was playing third base, and Ernie Banks comes up in the first inning, and we were playing in a field in Warren. It was a football field, and the left field was all field. Right field had a fence. Ernie Banks gets up and he hits his towering drive to left field. It would have been a home run in any park in the world. And Bobby Bender, who was our left fielder, he was a little short guy, and he was running and running and running. He finally caught the ball, and Ernie Banks come to running around second base, and as he comes towards me on third base, he said, "Hey, Four Eyes," he said, he calls me Four Eyes. He said, "Where was that little man playing out there?" And anyway, about 2 or 3 weeks later, Ernie Banks signed the contract.
Well, I also, just looking at the lineup, a couple of names that jumped out. Brewer was the second baseman for Kansas City, Chet Brewer.
Mm-hmm.
He was a big deal at the time, probably towards the end of his career. And I don't know, he may be in the Hall of Fame.
Could be.
Could be. And O'Neill, pinch hit, and I don't know if that was Buck O'Neill, but
Couldn't tell you.
couldn't tell you. I also, you gave to me, and this is a pretty personal interview I'm having here with Gordy, and I don't care if you're into this or not, but you said he was in the military, 1955,
Mm-hmm.
and you enlisted in.
Drafted right after college.
And,
It was tail end of the Korean War.
Mhm. And you had a relationship with my dad.
We worked together at Gunnell and Carlson's newsroom in Brooklyn Square. And your dad was maybe 4 or 5 years older than I was. He had been in the Navy, came out, and he and I were clerks at Gunnell and Carlson's. And we had some great times together. When your dad, Lyle, and I would get together, we told stories that went on. They were endless stories. Anyway.
Gordy gave to me tonight, and that's why it's a real flashback. It's a picture of Gordy in uniform coming over to our house, 101 Allendale Avenue.
Still there.
Still there. And there I am on Gordy's lap. I don't know if he wants me to recreate this scene or not tonight. And my brother is on my dad's lap. And a similar picture where we're both on his lap. So this is really a memory. But what I remember those nights where you would visit my dad, home on leave, and those turned out to be late night gab fests, laugh fest. I don't want to say the language was blue because I don't exactly know what that meant at the time, but I knew my mother the next day would remind my dad that was a long night. So you guys really gathered up storm.
Well, I used to go over there on Tuesday nights to watch Dragnet with Jack Webb. That was we didn't have television at my house, but your dad and mom had a television.
So Gunnell and Carlson was really much part of my dad's life, and he told many stories, and I know it was part of your life. There's got to be a story or two from Gunnell and Carlson you'd want to share. And if it throws my dad under the bus, it's okay.
No, it was a great place to work. It was down in Brooklyn Square, which was the hub of Jamestown in those days. There was everything in Brooklyn Square that you could imagine. It was like a big mall. There was department stores, men's clothing stores, there were hardware stores, drug stores, you name it, it was there. But anyway, your dad and I, there was a gentleman by the name of Johnny Van. Do any of you people remember Johnny Van had a dry cleaning store? And Johnny Van stuttered. He had a kind of a speech impediment. And he would come in early in the morning and buy a paper, and he would go across the street, and there was a couple of guys up the street that they were the Nunn brothers, and they would come down first thing in the morning, and they were there when Johnny Van came in every morning, and they worked for Jamestown Paint and Glass Company. One morning they came in and they said, we're going to do something for John. So they got some putty that was colored brown, and they took it over before Johnny came down. They put this putty rolled up to look like dog deposit, and they put it on the front doorstep of his little dry cleaning place over there. And your dad and I couldn't help, but we were trying to hold back our laughter. Well, Johnny came in, got his paper, went across the street, and we all watched him as he was over there, and he saw this little pile there. And he come over and he stuttered. He's got a shovel. He says, the dogs are, they look what they've done over there. So we had to give him a shovel, and everyone was just laughing their sides out at poor Johnny Van over there, just trying to scoop up this putty, and he took it and carefully put it in the sewer. That was one of the stories.
You guys had a scoreboard, right?
There was a scoreboard.
Wasn't there a guy who kept score?
Pat Gallagher.
Pat Gallagher. And wasn't there a sequence where, in fact, one of the teams scored? Well, go ahead, tell the story.
Well, there was a ticker that came in. Western Union had a ticker that came in and posted all the scores, or listed all the scores and how they happened. And one day, there was a whole bunch of people, all these dyed-in-the-wool baseball fans. There was a Coke machine back there, so the guys would buy Cokes, and they were all Yankee fans and Red Sox fans for the most part. Anyways, Pat comes up there and he's put some mark up on the scoreboard, 10 runs for whoever it was in the first inning. And these guys said, "Pat, that's wrong." And he said, no, it's right on the ticker, 10 runs. "Pat, it's wrong. There's only 9 guys on the team, Pat. They can't score 10 runs if there's only 9 guys on the team." That was just one of the stories.
You're known throughout the campus and perhaps throughout the world as a Detroit Tigers fan.
Absolutely.
How did that happen?
Well, I guess it happened way back when I became infatuated with Charlie Gehringer and Hank Greenberg. They were great Tigers back in the late 30s. And then, of course, the Tigers had a farm club here, and I ended up working for the park department one summer. And I worked for 4 summers, but one summer I got assigned to the stadium, and I was on part of the grounds crew, and so I got to see some of the Jamestown Tigers, who eventually ended up playing in the big leagues. So that was my attachment to the Tigers.
Were you around in 1946 when the Detroit Tigers came and played an exhibition game?
Sure.
What was that like?
Dizzy Trout came and he stood on his head because there was a sign out in the left field that was upside down, and Dizzy Trout was a pitcher for Detroit, and he was a clown, I guess. And he went out and stood on his head and looked at that sign and was trying to read it. That was one of the memories.
You know, you think about it, Gordy, you twice Major League Baseball teams came to Jamestown area to play Class D teams. Unheard of. And in that case, it was the world champion Detroit Tigers of 1945 came here. And you were there. Talk about Forrest Gump. And in fact, I have here a very prized object here. This is a baseball card in a Detroit Tiger uniform of one Gordy Black, Vice President of Sales. He was 5'11", 170 pounds. Varsity baseball, Jamestown High School, 1947-48, Allegheny College, Meadville, 49-53. Fantasy camp sponsors, his wife Sally, children Tim, Bob, and Carolyn. And what was that like going to fantasy camp?
Well, my family decided for a Christmas present that they would give me some seed money to go to a fantasy camp, Detroit Tiger fantasy camp. So I saved up a few extra dollars, and I went to see the Tiger veterans in Arizona. For some reason, they weren't playing in Florida that year, so we went to Arizona to play, and there was 50 some odd guys down there at this fantasy camp. And it was a real good experience. My locker mate, next to my locker was Rocky Calavito, and on the other side of the bench was Willie Horton. Of course, we had a chance to meet and talk to Willie. I had a picture of him last year. So it was great fun. It was good. I played in the game, pulled a Charlie horse. At age 58, I wasn't too good anymore. I ended up playing second base because I couldn't throw from third to first anymore.
What a thrill.
It was great.
And you still have your uniform?
I do.
And baseball cards?
Yep.
And you're still signing autographs, are you?
For a price.
For a price. All proceeds to the Jackson Center. I like this guy. It's terrific. if Sally were sitting here next to me, and she said, "Greg, please don't ask that question," what would she be telling you?
Wow, I don't know.
What would you ask, Sally?
After 56 years, I guess she'll liable to ask me most anything.
Well, let's talk about Arnold Palmer. My gosh, talk about playing with the top dogs. How did that happen?
I was working at Art Metal at the time, and Art Metal was advertising in Newsweek magazine, and they got invited to send a representative from Art Metal down to play golf at Latrobe with Arnold Palmer, and none of the brass at Art Metal played golf, so they came to me and said, would you like to go to Latrobe and play golf with Arnie Palmer? And so I said, when do I leave? So that was 1970, and there was a whole bunch of Newsweek advertisers were there. And the night before I played with Arnie, we had a little party at his house, and he showed us all his memorabilia. His wife was there, and his two daughters were, well, they were not even teenagers at the time. And the next day we went out and we played 3 holes. Everyone played 3 holes with Arnie. And I looked out and made a birdie on a hole, and Arnie pointed his finger at me and said, "You shouldn't be doing that to my, I'm the host here, you shouldn't be doing that."
What a thrill. What was he like?
Very, very gracious, very gracious, outgoing. He was just a very plain guy. His home was very plain. He had a big barn out beside his home, and in there he had all his golf clubs that he had cataloged, and all his shoes and from different tournaments he played in. It was fun.
Who are we missing here? I mean, you've just dropped some huge names. Think about this. Honus Wagner, Paul Wainer, Archie Vaughan, Ernie Banks, Arnold Palmer. It goes on. Oh, Dick Nixon. Tell me that story.
Well, I had a very close friend in Allegheny. He and I played ball together, and we were very, very close friends. And he ended up going to law school at Dickinson. And while he was at Dickinson, he met a young gal by the name of Joan Brownell. She was an undergraduate. She was in the undergraduate school. He was in law school. And he finally called me one day and he said, "Gordy, I'm getting married." And he said, "I want you to be my best man." And I said, "Well, who's the lucky gal?" "Well, her name is Joan Brownell." Didn't mean anything to me at the time. And he said, anyway, the wedding's going to be in Washington. It was in December of 1956. Anyway, I found out who Joan Brownell was. Her father was the Attorney General, Herbert Brownell. And so I trucked on down to Washington and had a great bachelor luncheon in the Department of Justice building with Mr. Brownell and all the wedding party that was there. And lo and behold, the next day they got married. And it was a huge wedding. It was the big wedding of Washington that year. All the celebrities, all the chief justices were there, and the protocol, how people got seated was by protocol. And lo and behold, Richard and Pat Nixon sat about 3 rows behind the altar. And after the wedding, they were setting up the receiving line, and Mr. Brownell comes up to me and said, "Gordy, you're the best man." He said, "I got a job for you." And I said, "Yes, sir, what can I do?" And he said, "Well," he said, "the Vice President and Mrs. Nixon would like to avoid all the crowds. While they're setting up the receiving line, would follow me. I want you to go visit with the Nixons for a few minutes, and you can keep them company." So the next thing you know, I'm standing in front of Richard and Pat Nixon, and we had a little visit. I can't remember what we talked about. I guess we talked about my friend Tom, the groom, and that's the end of the story.
And that's the story which ties in Gordy Black with the Robert Jackson Center, because everybody gets tied in, because Herbert Brownell was the Attorney General who argued the Brown versus Board of Education case, and before the court which Robert Jackson was at, and it was Gordy who was following up on that at that moment. That's sorry, terrific. What's the question you were expecting for me to ask tonight that I haven't?
Well, I guess I don't really have an answer, Greg. I guess living here is the important thing of this evening.
It's very nice, and of all the people you met, the number one person you've met is, of course, your wife,
Yep.
Sally. How did you meet her?
We met, we went to high school together. Her sister, Marie, and I were classmates. Sally's a couple of years younger. She was 2 classes behind me. And we got together, I guess, when she came home from, she went to nursing school, Columbia, got her degree in nursing from Columbia. And we came home and we got together. That was it.
And 56 years later of marital bliss.
Yep, 3 great kids.
Yep, and they are great kids. Ladies and gentlemen, Gordy Black, our surprise guest tonight.
Thank you for putting up with this. I hope you enjoyed some of it anyway.